My name is Bruce Gagnon. I'm the coordinator of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. I can still remember very vividly the day that I began working on space issues. It was June 12th, 1982, and I was living in Orlando, Florida at the time. I was home watching C-SPAN, the coverage of a massive protest, almost 1 million people in New York City, around the time of the UN Special Session on Disarmament. C-SPAN was covering the rally, the protests, the speakers, and I watched all of that. And when it was finished, C-SPAN cut away to a right-wing conference where the speaker was Ronald Reagan's head of SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars. His name was Lieutenant General Daniel Graham. And during the Q&A, somebody said, "General Graham, aren't you worried? They say there's almost 1 million people in New York City today protesting against nuclear weapons. Aren't you worried about that?" And he said, "No, I think it's fantastic. We're moving into space and they don't have a clue. Let them keep doing what they're doing." So because of my old training as a boy going to cowboy and Indian movies, those words, "head them off at the pass," came into mind. And so I quickly began learning everything I could. I only lived an hour away from the Space Center in Central Florida. And the next year, in 1983, I went to work for the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, where I worked for 15 years. And in that job, I began taking people repeatedly to the Space Center to protest military satellite launches, and soon, by 1989, I got a call from one of our members in Miami who said, "Did you read this story by Carl Grossman about the launch of plutonium into space?" I said, no, I never heard of the guy. It was in The Nation. She sent me a copy, and I called this Professor Carl Grossman, and we've been working together ever since. For 3 different launches, 1989, Galileo, 1990, Ulysses, and then 1997, Cassini, when they launched plutonium into space. Carl and I worked together on these launches, alerting people of the world, building a global opposition to these particular launches. I'll never forget, probably one of my all-time favorite stories around the time of Cassini in 1997. Just before the launch, I got a phone call from a woman in Detroit who said she was a waitress working at a restaurant, picked up the newspaper, was looking at it, and saw a little bit of an article about the launch, and she wanted to know what she could do to help. It was really quite amazing. In those days, we used to actually get some mainstream media coverage, whereas in today's world, because of the corporate consolidation of the media, we rarely get any coverage whatsoever. We have to rely on alternative media. But now in this present moment, we're seeing the proposal for Space Force, Trump's proposal, passing the House of Representatives and the Senate, part of the NDAA, $750 billion for more endless war, regime change, but also for this Space Force proposal, making it a separate entity within the military. But one of the more interesting things about the Space Force is the Democrats' response, especially in the House of Representatives. 188 Democrats voted in favor of this NDAA, and Democrats were overwhelmingly supporting this idea of creating the Space Force to move the arms race into the heavens. One of a congressman from Tennessee, one of the chairs of a House Armed Services Subcommittee that oversees this whole space area, he bragged that this is not a Trump proposal that we've pushed here. This is something that we Democrats have been supporting for a long time. And in fact, during the debate about the Space Force in the House, the only thing the Democrats complained about was that it should be named Space Corps rather than Space Force. So this really indicates to me just how much power the aerospace industry has inside of the Congress of the United States. They literally control both parties. They fund the politicians in both parties. They really influence the process in the House of Representatives to the point where we don't really have a true democracy anymore. And so the dangers here are just unbelievable. And the cost is something that we can't even imagine. The Pentagon has long been saying that moving the arms race into space will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. So large that they say they've got to come up with a dedicated funding source to pay for it. And they say they have. In fact, some years ago in one of the industry publications called Space News, they said, we have found this dedicated funding source to pay for Star Wars, and we're now sending our lobbyists to Washington to secure it. And they said, it is the entitlement programs that officially are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and what's left of the social safety net that now is in tatters across the country. And so these are the programs that the aerospace industry has targeted for defunding in order to move that money into this endless war program for control and domination of space. Some years ago, the U.S. Space Command came out with a planning document called Vision for 2020, where they talked about the fact that the U.S. needs to have what they call full spectrum dominance, control conflict at every level. The land with our Army, the sea with our Navy, the air above us with the Air Force, and now space as well with this new Space Force. And they say that with this kind of capability, the U.S. will be able to control space and dominate space and deny other countries access to space. In fact, they say that the U.S. would be the master of space. And in fact, at the Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs, Colorado, above their doorway, this slogan is there, Master of Space. And they wear it as a patch on their uniform as well. In the late 1980s, a congressional study was done called Military Space Forces the Next 50 Years. And in that study that was eventually published as a book, the Congress said that we, the United States, our military, must control the pathway on and off the planet Earth so that we will be able to decide which countries can literally go out and mine the sky. Not only countries, but corporations or wealthy individuals like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post. All of these rich guys are now developing space aspirations because they've got the word that mining for gold on the asteroids, mining for magnesium and cobalt and uranium on Mars, water and helium-3 on the moon, would make whoever controls this process rich beyond anything imaginable. And so now after the taxpayers, you, have paid all the years of research and development, the startup costs, to be able to actually go out and mine the sky for profit, now they're going to privatize all of this, turn it over to these wealthy individuals and corporations, and let them have at it. So this book, Military Space Forces, said that with our armed forces on either side of the moon, we would be able to control who got on and off the planet Earth, kind of like controlling the front gate of a military base. So I would submit that the Space Force has two primary missions. One is to control the Earth on behalf of corporate globalization. Whoever controls space controls the Earth because they can hear everything, they can see everything, and they can target every place on the planet. And then secondly, whoever controls space will then be able to control who gets on and off the planet and can go out and mine the sky. So this is what the Space Force would do with your tax dollars. I call it pyramids to the heavens. The space corporations are the new pharaohs of our age, building these expensive pyramids, and we, the taxpayers, will be like the slaves of the time in Egypt, where the pharaohs ruled. Well, the United Nations has two treaties, the Moon Treaty and the Outer Space Treaty, that say that no country, no corporation, no individual can claim ownership of the planetary bodies. They're the province of all humankind. And this was really a very forward-thinking process to create these treaties, trying to prevent war in the heavens from happening the way it's happened here on Earth. If you go back to the 15th century, when the Europeans were all cutting each other's throat as they set off to find the new world, to find new markets, to find and control resources around the planet, they created the global war system that we still suffer from today. And so the UN very astutely then wanted to create these treaties that would, again, circumvent this process, circumvent this moving this bad seed of war and greed and environmental degradation into the heavens. But during the Obama administration, actually, Barack Obama signed a law that allows American corporations and wealthy individuals to make land claims on these planetary bodies, circumventing, violating, destroying essentially the intent and the legal framework of these treaties. And since that time, we've seen a rush of these wealthy individuals and corporations say that we're going to go out there and we're going to mine the sky and we're going to profit from it. We're going to bring capitalism to the heavens. So what do we do about all this? How do we organize to oppose this? Well, like everything, this idea of the Space Force has an Achilles heel. And the Achilles heel is money. It's so expensive to try to do all of this stuff. One rocket launch costs hundreds of millions of dollars. One satellite costs hundreds of millions of dollars to build. Rockets have about a 10% failure rate. Often they go boom on launch. The rocket, the satellite are destroyed. They have to start all over again. It's a massively expensive undertaking. And then they have to have ground stations all over the planet that communicate with these satellites. It's a hugely expensive proposition. That's the Achilles heel. If we fight for social progress, if we fight for environmental cleanup, especially today when our real problem that we have is climate crisis, if we fight for funding for those programs, we help take money away from this idea of moving the arms race into space. So don't underestimate the value of fighting for social, for human progress, for environmental cleanup and environmental care on this planet, this beautiful planet of ours. Beyond that, we've all got to work harder to get more people to understand what this issue is about. I recommend highly a film called Pax Americana and the Weaponization of Space. Several members of the Global Network were featured in this film, done by a French-Canadian filmmaker that played all over the world, in theaters, on public television throughout Europe and Canada, but never was allowed to play in the United States because the filmmaker could not get a distribution deal for the film in the US. Why? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. The corporations didn't want the American people to see such a great film. So I highly recommend watching that. And please visit our website at spaceforpeace.org and learn more about these issues and help share that information with others. We have this very brief moment now in history where we can try to prevent this destabilizing, destructive, and highly expensive arms race from moving into space. We don't have a minute to waste. Please help us defeat this insanity, literal insanity, from happening. Thank you. Thank you very much.